Um, all right, thank you so much for joining everyone today. So today I'm going to present to you the work around the multi-objective optimization and modeling of the roadside mowing in problem. This is a case study from France that I recently presented in the IEEE IAMOT conference. At the beginning of this work, there is Nicolas Bodan internship that Iman has started, and basically we continued adding more to that one. So I'll go through the steps of both the modeling procedure that we have applied, and then some results that we have obtained, and of course, some future ideas. So I'm presenting today, but actually behind this work, there are also the French partners, Professor Mauricio Camargo and Dr. Brunelle Marche from University of Lorraine, France. And of course, this project has been sponsored by Noremat, um, via Christophe. Noremat is a major industry player that produces agricultural tools, and some of these tools are actually being used for roadside mowing, and the data that we have is actually provided from their yearly operations. So I will just keep the Future Mobility Lab introduction. I think the seminar is for internal purposes only. So usually for external introduction, we'll go through this. And I will jump directly to the summary of this presentation. So I'm going to talk about the problem. I'm going to talk about the case study that we have been working on and the methodology, which includes three main parts. The first one is really a clustering around the road segments. Then basically the second step is around how can we find the minimal path between cluster of road segments. And then finally, how we describe and how we formulate a multi-objective optimization problem, of course, ending with some results. When I'm talking about the multi-objective modeling, in general, we have to take into consideration multiple aspects. The roadside mowing problem is actually, it's being done in the context of a major uptake of the kilometer roads that are being constructed everywhere around the world. And as part of this construction, the road verges, which is basically the portion from the road to the vegetation nearby, is the one that usually needs to get trimmed, needs to get prepared, and it gets basically affected. In France, this is basically the roadside is pretty huge. France has a high a road network infrastructure on top of the public transport and the train network infrastructure, which occupy a lot of space. So basically, there is this interest to not only optimize how they do that, but also optimize basically the space allocation and the resource allocation across the years. Now, why is it challenging? You would say, first of all, from economic reasons. The equipment that you are basically using needs to be maintained on a yearly basis, and then you have to have like a uniform utilization of the territories, like all the departments that are using the same tools. There are technological challenges in terms of valorizing the biomass collection, so everything that gets pulled apart from the roadside basically needs to be collected and then maybe used in other contexts for various, let's say, greenhouse reduction purposes. And of course, from a social perspective, because road safety is an important element. So whenever they're doing these road operations, they need to do it safely as well. So there are specific restrictions that need to be put in place and so on. I talked earlier about the environmental changes of how can we actually preserve the habitat of the animals and the plants that are being basically destroyed in order to keep our roads safe. And I think the last two challenges, which is basically what we try to incorporate, is the fact that there's always a lack of staff, a lack of human resources that needs to be deployed on a yearly basis to do this type of job. And they also work with the time restriction, and there is limited time for doing the operations, and not only during the day but also during the year. So when it actually comes to how the roadside is done around the world, you have probably, in case you don't remember, there are quite a few studies that are tackling similar kind of issues around the world. So either we're talking about municipal solid waste and systems to actually manage this type of waste. Um, Various models are being deployed and are being in use. Either we're talking about mixed integer programming models. Some people use multi-objective nonlinear programming. Some people actually use two-phase fuzzy binary model and so on. The Markovian models as well have been used for this type of issue and highway maintenance. However, from what we've previously investigated, there is basically not some sort of state-of-art technique that looks into how should we best do the roadside optimization. And this is being done using like long-term on the field practice. So this is really an open, both an open technical issue, but also an open research issue. Now, with regards to the department where the case study has been taken, so this is France. The department is actually in the northeast. It's called Lorraine, and this department is actually divided in different, I would say, different geographic areas. And in total, there are what they call 16 cantons, or if it's easier to actually understand what is that, zones. So we denote by ZITCI a zone which is allocated to a specific technical center that you see here. And this technical center is actually responsible for all the mowing and maintenance activities inside the region. And each technical center has a dedicated team that works here, and they have a mowing machine, and they have specific regulations and standards that they need to respect on a yearly basis. There are specific areas in each of the regions, which means that some roads are considered, for example, primary, some roads are secondary or tertiary, and they need to be mowed twice per year. However, this is more of a mountaineering kind of area, which means that some slopes are much harder to basically mow than others. So all the zones in the mountain area, they require more carefulness. So it's a little bit tricky. Now, in terms of the methodology and the scientific methodology that we applied, we basically looked at mapping the territory, and this is by using QGIS, one of the main common tools for mapping and quick insights geographical investigation. Apart from that, we went into applying road segmentation approach that I'm going to describe in the next slides. This is basically using a k-means algorithm in order to identify what would be the best roads to be mowed at the same time by a machine that is currently in use. And then finally, once we know like what roads are clusters to what areas, we formulated the optimization problem. There are some variables. I know it might seem a little bit too much, but keep in mind, for example, the 16 number of technical centers, of course, their coordinates, how many zones we have in that area, and basically the number of roads that can be found in each of those roads, the number of machines that belong to each TCI, technical center. And the last three parameters actually are very important. These are the ones provided by Noremat, is the use time for machines in each technical center, the cost of staff personnel for each technical center, and then the cost of machines for maintaining and using those machines for each technical center. So these are some introductory variables. Now, when it comes to the road segmentation, So after we lay down all the network infrastructure, and we know which roads fit into which technical center department, what we actually have thought of is clustering those roads by their specificity and their closeness, so that the technical center can prioritize. For example, maybe I'll do the north first, and then I'll do the south, and then I'll do the east or the west, etc. This is a very simple algorithm. A lot of you in this call are familiar with it, but I'll just briefly describe it to give a general introduction. So usually K-means is being used to group various specific sets of points. In our case, we actually replace the points by a road segment, right? So instead of clustering points, we're actually clustering road segments. And the clustering is being done around this centroid. The obtaining of the centroid is actually by minimizing this objective function, which is the difference between the center of a cluster and each of the road segments that falls into that cluster area definition. And basically all the distances between the centroids and the road segments fall into a subset Si, with of course a mu in, which is the mean distance between all the road segments in a cluster and that centroid. Now this is the pseudocode of that algorithm, but just a short going through it is that we consume as input the location of the technical centers, the number of areas that we have, and the road positioning. So we are actually looking at the road segmentation, and we are trying to provide as an output the best placement of the centroids that are being generated by clustering specific road segments. We start by choosing the initial number of cluster. We basically then filter the road segments for each of those random chosen clusters. Once we have a subset of those road segments to the initial clusters, basically we are going through calculate and going through this iterative loop, which goes up to a specified number of iterations. For each road cluster, basically we're trying to find the nearest centroid, and then for that near cluster, we're basically trying to attach the road segment that falls and it's closer located to that road cluster. And once you do that, you basically just append the number of roads in each cluster until you eventually end up recalculating and the positioning of the new centroid based on all the new detected, as I would say, distances between the old centroids and the new road segments that you have found. So it's kind of like reiteratively going through this centroid positioning until you are satisfied or you can't find any more road segments that will minimize your objective functions that you have here. Once we basically done that, now that we have the clusters, and this was actually one of the main steps we took forward, is basically trying to find the minimal distance between the clusters. So what does that mean? Assuming you have a specific number of clusters that needs to be mowed, you want to know in which order you're going to do that. So we actually use some real-time TomTom API calls that just looks at the positioning of those clusters, and then it just finds the shortest path. So this is a distance m, the minimum distance between the clusters allocated to each technical center. So it's kind of like a minimal route, the distance that you would have to do in order to address all the clusters. And once we have that, once we know the clusters, we know the minimal distance in between the clusters, then we start defining the multi-objective optimization. So this is actually a preparation step. Before you need to define any objective function, you need to take some steps to see what are your variables and how are you going to calculate your your objective functions that go into this internal optimization structure. Now, one thing that we have done is we have used the variable for staff and the material costing that that Noremat provided to us. I will note them here. CS cost for staff and CM cost for materials for each technical center. And based on that, we are now able to calculate what we call the cost for staff per kilometer, knowing that we simply divide the cost that we have received versus the minimal distance in between the cluster of each center. And the same way, we're actually able to define the cost for the material as the divide between the cost of the material for the entire center versus the distance that that center needs to do between the clusters. So once we have the cost for staff and materials per kilometer, it's very easy. You just add them up and then you actually have a total cost for each center per kilometer. And the last step, which is critical, is you can actually go even furthermore and you can calculate the marginal staff and material cost. What do I mean by marginal? Marginal means how much you are basically spending per kilometer for each technical center, but divided by how many machines you have. So it's kind of like a cost estimation based on the number of machines that you have in your technical center. Why, you would ask, why did you calculate this marginal cost? Simply because we wanted to run multiple scenarios in which we would assume that the technical centers would purchase more machines, and we wanted to see the impact. So say, for example, they want to use not only one machine, but 2 machines, 3 machines, etc. Then we need to have this marginal cost per kilometer inside the technical center in order to be able to scale up. So that was one of the reasons why the marginal staff and material costs have been calculated. And when you add these two up, you're actually arriving at a total cost per kilometer, which of course depends on the number of machines that you have in that technical center. Similarly, we used as well the how should I say, the minimal distance to calculate the mowing time per number of kilometers. So we actually received the time that the technical center has spent across the years to do the mowing. And what we have actually done is basically divided that utility time that we received in number of days for each technical center, dividing it by the minimal distance obtained at step 2. And basically this is how we calculated what we call an utility time of a center, which has a specific number of machines M, but per kilometer. And this is very similar to the cost calculation, which allowed us to estimate as well the marginal mowing times, which is basically just dividing the mowing time per kilometer to the number of machines. So now that we have marginal cost per kilometer per machine, and now we have utility time per kilometer per machine, then for us it was basically very simple to formulate the objective function. I think yes, I forgot to mention that basically there is one more variable that is being calculated based on the optimal, so utility time optimal, that the center would actually have if they would really do the minimum distance, which is basically multiplying per number of kilometers multiplied by this minimum distance. Hope I didn't lose you with the formulas. There is a little bit more to go. So the fourth step is really use those variables calculated at all those previous steps, and then formulate the multi-objective optimization criteria. Now, there are 2 objective functions as of yet in this study. The first objective function is really minimizing the number of machines that would actually give us the minimal total cost. So the F1 TCI is actually the total cost that a technical center would pay to actually deliver the minimal distance between the cluster based on the total cost per kilometer. So this is really identifying how many machines do I need to have at the minimum in order to deliver in an optimal way and basically save money. The second function, the F2, is actually talking about that utility time that we have previously obtained. It's the same thing, like what is the minimum number of machines that we need to utilize in order to reduce the utility time of a center. And this has been calculated as well with the previous formula that you have seen. What's happening is that when you have two objective functions in parallel, you need to be mindful of constraints that appear. In this case, for us, I think one of the constraints was that the minimal distance between the technical center needs to be how should I say, needs to be done twice, because you need to mow the roads in both directions. So this minimal distance was obtained only in one direction. So we had to make sure that it fits between 0 and 2 multiplied by the total length of the roads in the network. We need to make sure that the number of machines is actually not overpassing the maximum allowed by center, and we also had to make sure that the number of technical centers stays below 60. Now, there are some assumptions in order to resolve that type of problem. One of the assumptions is that, of course, the optimal distance that the machines are running needs to be non-null. This means that at least they need to do something throughout the day. The number of machines, they cannot be higher than the capacity of a center. So basically, if a center says, oh, I'm limited to buying only 5 machines, then we have to take that into consideration. Another assumption is that the roads allocated to individual clusters needs to be only delivered and mowed by one single center. So we basically made the assumption that the same road is not mowed twice by different centers. So there's a clear limitation of which road of which center is doing. We also made an assumption that the machines are similar in performance. However, that's not true. In reality, what is happening is that Noremat has a large span of machines, and they all have different techniques of doing the roadside mowing. Some of them are raising, like razors. Some of them are aspirators. It's a different techniques, right, for doing the roadside mowing, and different machines could be used based on the type of roads that are being being operated on. However, we did not have enough information of what machine is being used under what type of road. So that's why the assumption is that all machines are similar. But in reality, yeah, they're not, and they have different costs, even for purchasing, for maintaining, and for asset management, like replacing parts. Now, the formulas that you have seen, they are for a single mowing season only. So if there are 2 mowing seasons per year, we need to scale up to 2, or if more seasons, then we need to also adjust. We also treated all roads the same for the study. Now, in reality, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are primary, secondary, tertiary roads, and there are roads which are in the mountains much more difficult to mow than others. So for us, it was hard to get that road segmentation with high detail from the first stage of the project. So hopefully this will be done in the next stage of the project. Also, we made the assumption that one centroid that you have seen previously is actually the center of an area that needs to be mowed, right? So basically, the machines needs to go first in that sub-regional town or sub-regional cluster, as we would say, and then do the roads in there before moving on to the next cluster. So with these assumptions, some results. So 8 clusters have been identified. You've probably seen some of them early on, but not the results with the optimal routing between them. So these 8 clusters have been basically analyzed via different scenarios. Scenario 1 For example, if we're using only one mowing machine. So let's take, for example, the center of Neufchâteau. This is one to the west, the technical center to the west. So the optimal output of the minimal routing in between the cluster of road would be that machines would actually depart from the technical center. They would go, for example, to Centroid 7, mow all the roads that are allocated to Centroid 7, then move on to Centroid 3, do all the roads here, then to 6, 1, 4, 2, 8, and 5, and come back. So basically, this would be the optimal order that would need to be done if only one machine would be used, for example, for this technical center. The covering, I think it was 322.6 kilometer. It would take 38 days for the first mowing season, and eventually 77 days for the second season. So that is quite a long time for them to do that. So definitely using one machine for this center, it's not an ideal, it's really not an ideal solution. Now, when we go to the second scenario, where assuming that this center will purchase another machine, so they would have two machines now operating. The results of the cluster gave us basically two regions. So the first option would be from technical center to go to cluster 6, then cluster 1, 4, 2, and back. So this would be, let's say, a first area that machine 1 would do. And then the second one would be from 7 to 3, going back to 5, and then 8, and back to the technical center. So we are having two machines that are operating in different parts of the region, and they're actually optimizing much better the travel distance. The travel time has been reduced by 40%. But of course, now that we have two machines, the cost increased, right, for maintaining both of the machines and also for manipulating stuff that work in parallel on the two machines. Now, the scenario 3, what if this center would add 3 machines? If in that case, basically the cluster results would actually go for like technical center, going to cluster 1, going to cluster 3, 7, and back. And the second machine would actually do technical center 4, 6, and back. And the third machine would do technical center 5, 8, 2, and back. So this will be the areas, so that all those areas would need to be delivered by 3 machines working in parallel. Of course, what's happening is that you would need more people to run in parallel 3 machines, and then of course the maintenance cost and service for these 3 machines would actually increase. You will spend less time, and we will see exactly how it reports with regards to the other, but your cost would actually go up. What is happening with scenario 4 and 5? They're very similar, so that's why I didn't put another schema. Why is that? Basically, when you start adding more and more machines, what's happening is that they will all be responsible for delivering very short distances and short clusters. So, for example, let's say machine 1 will go for center to 3, 7, and back. Center 3, 7, and back, or 6, 1, and back, or 4, 2, and back, and so on. So very, very short, almost like two, kind of like only 2 clusters of regions and then coming back. If you add 5 machines, actually, it's even you reduce the operations from technical center to 1 machine and back. So all of a sudden, it really doesn't make any sense to move to 5 machines, because you're really covering with 1 machine only 1 small region going back. So even from a clustering perspective, it actually made no sense. Why would this center need to, for example, use 5 machines at all? When we actually plotted all the results for the across the scenarios that you have seen, so for example, you have a 3D representation. This is the distance, these are the time, this is the time, sorry, and this is the cost that would take to operate the machines. So, and what you see here, the bubbles are actually the scenarios with regards to number of machines. So the first bubble here, let's take the blue one, it's machine 1. then it's machine two machines, three, four machines, and five machines per technical center. So what's happening is that so these are the number of scenarios, and sorry, the three different lines are actually mowing season one, the blue one. The red line is mowing season two, and the green is actually the total, like a yearly kind of cost that would add up if they would do the mowing twice per year. Now, what is happening is, I think it's obvious from the line representation, is that the when you are having, let's say the difference between one and two machines, it actually translates into, how should I say, a shorter distance that is being delivered by each machine. You still maintain the cost. Maybe it's not really obvious because of the 3D chart, but the cost still maintain relatively low. So this actually shows us that you can actually scale up to really improve your operations and add two machines easily without any big trouble. However, what's happening is that from three machines onward, with regards to the costing, there's definitely a significant jump, which increased significantly the cost for that technical center. And not necessarily, not necessarily saving too much of a time or saving the number of kilometers traveled to deliver. So it's really, how should I say, from three machine onwards, you can see that the cost explodes a lot, and there is basically no incentive to really add up. So the optimal recommendation for this center would be to stay for two machines. Now, the same kind of analysis apply to all the technical centers, and for each center, a personalized recommendation with the number of machines that they need to purchase and maintain have been done. And as a kind of like future step or limitation of what this has been done so far is that one of the main constraints to actually treat the road types the same. So this needs to be separated for the next phase of the project, and do the cost analysis by road types, by different mowing machines, and then have a breakdown of that total cost estimation based on the combination of road types plus machines. Then basically, another limitation is that the data around staff availability was not there to really say, okay, this person worked 3 days on this machine, or we have another staff that worked maybe for 1 month on this machine, etc. So that has not being included. And of course, another limitation is that, the K-means is one clustering technique, but others can be applied. And I'm pretty sure that if we try in the second stage, various clustering, we might have some new interesting results. As a future work, one of the objectives that the company wants to include is, we so far have an approach for minimizing the total cost and also the total utilization time. But eventually what they want is to reduce the CO2 emissions that are being generated by different machines. So this means that we will need to have data around what machines they're using at what time and how many emissions those machines are producing. Also, on a long term, what would it mean if the company would switch to more electric machines? Is that even an option? Is that even possible? Another piece of work is basically to add with regards to the waste collection. So we didn't include that because the waste collection, just the waste capturing and then collection and then disposal, it's an entire operation in itself. And of course, the quantity of biomass that is being collected can be valorized as well if it gets fermented and deposed to some eco-friendly locations. We haven't included that one as well. And of course, another thing that probably you have heard before is, would it change if so what we have done so far, we have done a local optimization for each technical center. However, when we're talking about operations of the entire department, that entire departments needs to somehow synchronize the operations across each technical center. So eventually, when you have an entire department that needs to plan out their entire operations throughout the year, it needs to be some sort of synchronization in between the technical centers, or at least some sort of communication and collaboration. So that would be a fantastic thing to add. Now I would like to end the presentation by saying that we have just been announced that our proposal for a joint PhD between France and UTS, between University of Lorraine in France and UTS, has been accepted for funding by the European Commission. This is a large program which had like 60 partners that all applied for joint PhD programs. So I have one in collaboration between France and Australia, which means that we are soon going to recruit a PhD student to work on this topic with this industry partner. And the salary payments are going to be at high level European standards. So there will be an announcement made soon, but there will be a dedicated PhD student that will continue this work, and that hopefully we will also see coming to Australia to work with us in the future. I think that's it, and I'll just stop sharing, and I hope I didn't bore you too much with the technical details.